Hey YouTube, welcome back to our channel. My name is Elena.
And I'm Bjorn.
And we are Viking Age reenactors and living historians here to talk with you about your favorite Viking ships.
Today we're taking an in-depth look at episode 22 of Vinland Saga. It's a great episode. I feel like there's not a lot that we can touch on in terms of like historical context and everything like that. This is very much like a background, overarching plot device storytelling kind of thing.
And again, they're making me care about Askeladd, and I don't appreciate that right now.
Yeah. So to start off, it's awesome to see some backstory with Askeladd, because we got a little bit here and there, and you keep saying Askeladd, and I keep wanting to do the same thing, and I keep not doing it. So whatever. It's gonna be both. It's the same thing. It's awesome to see some background with him because he's such an interesting character, and he's someone that we're not able to read as well as Thorfinn and Thorkil and even Canute. We saw Canute come into himself, and like we know his mind, and Askeladd's very unique because just like Thor's, we don't know his mind. Like, we don't fully grasp or understand immediately who he is just by looking at him and stuff. This episode was really cool. It's really amazing to kind of see the origin tale of such like a prolific character and understand like on a fundamental basis like the similarities between Askeladd and Thorfinn, but also like the drastic differences between the two. At heart, obviously, Thorfinn did not grow up as a slave or anything like that, but they had very similar experiences of just being young and naive, kind of, and watching somebody who, like, they absolutely love die, essentially. But they handled it in completely contrasting ways. Thorfinn has been very, like, passive this entire time, just kind of, like, going along and waiting for his, like, the moment to kind of be given to him to, you know, strike back and get revenge and do all these things, and he's just been like consumed with this hatred and resentment and bitterness, and it's changed him fundamentally. He's a completely different person from what we knew him as. Like even Leif was saying earlier in the last episode, like he's completely changed as a person. You know, what happened to this boy that I knew? And Askeladd on the other end was very active all the time. You know, like even as a young boy, as a slave, he was doing chores and he was working and he was contributing to kind of like help his mom and do all these things. And when he saw his mom about to die, he immediately took action and like did whatever he could and put up his dukes and like fought off the attacker, his own father, and like proved his worth essentially in that sense. And then like understood he wasn't able to like overtake his father or anything like that in like an honorable duel or whatever because he was more gifted and everything, but he like learned the system, he learned the game and manipulated his way through and like played everybody against themselves. Like he just learned their nature and like learned how to read people and everything and pit them against each other and capitalize on all their secret desires and shit. And it's awesome to see that, you know, and it kind of just goes to show like Askeladd from like a very young age didn't really take things for granted. He understood like the value and everything that he was being given and everything. And then Thorfinn on the opposite hand like was attached to his father absolutely, but like was totally bullheaded and very like arrogant and demanded all these things. Like even as a kid, you know, like he stole onto the boat because his dad told him to stay home, you know, and all this stuff. And he's always kind of played like a very passive role, just kind of going along and like taking orders and trying to like earn that right to fight Askeladd when he kind of should have been doing what Askeladd was himself did as a child of just learn the system and like get nice and cozy with them and do all those things. But you know, we saw in the early episodes, we knew that like his father had raised him to kind of not do that as well. And
I think that's the fundamental difference between Thorfinn and Askeladd that we're seeing here. Whereas Askeladd, when he was younger, after his mother's death and everything, he did steal in and kill his father in his bed while he was sleeping, along with his mistress or wife or whoever she was. Whereas Thorfinn would never do that. We did have a scene where Thorfinn had an opportunity to steal in and kill Askeladd while he was sleeping.
Askeladd was awake the whole time too.
Or was pretending to sleep.
Yeah.
But he didn't do that because he was raised more honorably by his father, and I feel like Askeladd also knew that at the time, and that's why he just kind of kept still and kept to himself. because he knew that Thorfinn would never kill him the way that he killed his own father. And that's the fundamental difference between the two characters.
Yeah.
Is Askeladd has no qualm with, killing a guy in his bed, even if the guy is his own father, whereas Thorfinn would just absolutely never do that, even if the killer is his father's killer. He still wants that honorable duel. He wants to follow his father's footsteps.
Yeah. I personally value Thorfinn's mentality of, facing that conflict head on and giving it equal opportunity and not just taking advantage of like a sleeping man who lets down his guard. But in the same sense, I definitely agree with Askeladd of saying like, you shouldn't necessarily just be like screaming your head off and like give into that kind of like emotional state, because you can be easily manipulated and controlled that way, which is what Askeladd has been doing this entire show. And he even said as much at the very end of like, you're so easy to manipulate and control because of your emotions. Like, it's so easy to rile you up and like have you completely lose your mind and lose all senses. You can't keep a focused head, and that's like your biggest problem. And I absolutely agree with that too. It's like a battle meditation kind of thing. I think this is a little bit of a dynamic between like Eastern versus Western thought as well. At least that's how it kind of comes off to me. Askeladd is very much like a silent, focused warrior. He's not boastful, he's not boisterous or anything like that. He's
not like Thorkel.
Exactly. I mean, those are two perfect examples. He's the antithesis of Thorkel. And I think that's a little bit of like a stereotypical example of like an Eastern versus Western mentality or dichotomy in terms of like a warrior aspect, because the Nordic Viking and the Japanese samurai are like perfect examples of like that opposite, just stereotypically at the very least. Because we have the Nordic berserker who like screams bloody Mary and is just all muscles and no armor and just runs into things completely chaotically and has no form and just relies on brute strength and like sheer terror to overcome somebody. And then we look at the stereotypical samurai who is very focused and inwardly drawn and all meditative and at peace with himself, and is able to keep a straight head on his shoulders and not be like overwhelmed by emotion, and very logical, and just it's all about like the quickest, most efficient cuts and things like that. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing a little bit reflected in Askeladd's presentation here, is that that Eastern warrior ideal kind of coming into the fore and kind of complaining about the Western. Obviously, like I said multiple times, I made a point to it's very stereotypical.
Yeah.
Because
it's not necessarily the way that it was.
Yeah, because not like all samurais were perfect ideal warriors and shit like that, and obviously not all Vikings were brainless barbarians who just went on a rampage. I honestly hate that stereotype.
That's what we're trying to dispel here.
Exactly. And I think Askeladd's a great example of a Western warrior who understands that dynamic. But yeah, just a subtle point to make as I kind of noticed.
Originally, when we first started watching this, we were commenting about how Askeladd is not a name that you find in the sagas.
Typically, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like a little bit out of left field. Somebody in our YouTube comments noted that his name comes from Askeladd, or Askeladd, I'm assuming it's Askeladd, who is a modern folk hero. He's sort of the subject of modern fairy tales. He is a character that grows up sort of in poverty. And I think to a certain extent when they were talking about how his name meant ashes because he was always covered in ash, sort of like similar to our Cinderella. And then he goes out and he kills the dragon and he saves the princess, and he becomes this like hero. That is actually a character that exists in Norway's fairy tales that they tell their kids.
Interesting.
In the modern day.
Right.
Nothing to do with Vikings. But I found it interesting because I looked into it a little bit. I was just like, oh, wait, this is actually like a character that we can look into. I don't know specifically the stories because I didn't read the stories myself. I just know like that very baseline of it.
Yes. Overview.
Yeah, the base overview. But it was actually kind of interesting because they took this modern folk hero almost from the kids' fairy tales.
Right.
And they inserted him into the Scandinavian Viking age and kind of made him make sense. I mean, in his sense, he kind of came a little bit from nobility, but he grew up as a slave in poverty, covered in ashes, and then he broke out of it and he became this hero, a part of the Vikings.
Right.
And he kind of went and got his own wealth as a result of that.
I love that.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified of our future videos. And we'll see you in the next one.